Big Local is a very complex social intervention, so it basically embeds itself within various different local contexts. It's been sort of implemented across 150 different areas, so it's understanding how Big Local actually embeds within those contexts, and then the changes that will happen within those local contexts as the initiative co-evolves with those local communities. And also an understanding of how, if we get our heads around how the initiative embeds and co-evolves with these local communities, how that can help us to then think about how you might evaluate the changes that come about.
So one of the ways that we looked at was how residents and local organisations have worked together in the past, whether that had happened at all, or their experiences of that, and how that perhaps shaped the way that communities and public agencies like councils or community and voluntary sectors were coming together.
And we're also noticing how it's starting to diffuse or beyond perhaps the initial group of people who might have become involved in the initiative, and to start involving a much wider group of local residents in these areas. We've also noticed how pre-existing aspects of the local context have impacted on those changes, so particularly to do with how people have interacted in the past. And so in some areas where the initiative comes into a place where there's a group of residents who might feel quite cohesive, it might be a ward or a group of people who kind of have some kind of collective identity in that area, how it's much easier for them to sort of come together and to identify shared priorities and start acting towards them. Whereas in areas where perhaps there's a few sort of disparate communities, perhaps one particular estate that has its own identity and then other areas that have slightly different identities, it's taken more time for the initiative to actually kind of embed within those areas and for the people to actually get together and identify their shared priorities. Whether or not people in the area have experience of working together in a kind of structured way is also important. So in areas where perhaps there was already a kind of local activist kind of community or sort of partnership groups already set up, if Big Local comes into those areas, it can sort of work through the structures that they might already have in place. So if there's pre-existing relationships between local residents and the council, for example, it's much easier for them to sort of get going in terms of forging those relationships that might be important for bringing about the kinds of changes they might want through Big Local. Whereas if they haven't got that experience, it's more of a slow kind of lead-in process. It's important for practitioners, I say mainly from a methodological perspective, in terms of really understanding what these social interventions like Big Local are, the kinds of changes that they're bringing about, and how we can conceptualise and actually start to understand and then measure those changes. So it's helpful in terms of evaluating the impacts of these important initiatives, which perhaps in the past we really struggled to evaluate. So hopefully by sort of showing how you can start to track these changes in the local communities, we can provide the kind of evidence that's needed to advocate for these interventions if we find that they are effective, or if they're not, then at least we've got the evidence to know whether or not they are effective, and to be able to sort of balance out some of the decisions they have to make in terms of allocating resources. So there's more evidence for these social interventions where perhaps that evidence was lacking and there wasn't the ability to advocate for these kind of interventions in the past.